Hi, I'm Helen. Welcome to my channel. Today, I'm so excited to have Dexter Zhuang with me. He is a product lead at Xendit, and previously he has worked in Dropbox for 4 years when he saw Dropbox from pre-IPO to IPO. So if you haven't checked out the previous video on Dexter's journey, do check it out. Dexter, what do you think was something that was really surprising or shocking when you first came to Southeast Asia and you first joined a Southeast Asian startup?
When I worked with my colleagues, all of our communication was primarily through email and through Slack messages, and I talked to customers through email, and that was kind of how we got things done. But then I remember my first day actually after I joined Xendit, and my colleagues started adding me on WhatsApp, and then they're also like, hey, we have these customers, can you join their WhatsApp groups? I'm like, what's kind of going on? What are these WhatsApp groups? So then they added me to a couple of these WhatsApp groups. That's where the customers were actually giving product feedback, asking technical questions. They're like, hey, I didn't receive this particular API response. What's happening? There were also operational kind of requests that were being done in these WhatsApp groups, and pretty soon my WhatsApp group list was really long with customer threads, and that was super surprising to me because I wasn't familiar with that way of working, and I felt a little bit overwhelmed at first. But now I'm comfortable with it because it's been a little bit of time, and I have learned that, this is the way, business is done in Southeast Asia. It took a little bit of time. I'll be honest.
What are your observations about the differences in product culture in Southeast Asian startups and the startups in the US?
So at Xendit, I try not to have these group kind of product reviews where it's a barrage of negative feedback because I realize it's a little bit harder for folks to adapt to that kind of communication style. And instead, we try to have the group discussions and make it a little bit more conversation in the group setting. And then if there's negative feedback or constructive feedback that needs to be given, then I'll try to do it in a one-on-one after those sessions, and that tends to be a little bit easier, I think, for the presenter to kind of receive the information than if I were to call them out in the group session.
It's kind of a culture difference because in Southeast Asia, a lot of cultures, I'm not trying to generalize here, but it's a lot about face saving ideas where you don't really want to go on head on, and especially in a group setting to criticize a certain product, and you would prefer it in a more private setting where it is safer in a way, clarify which areas they can work on and then privately improve. And sometimes in Southeast Asian companies, we have a lot of teams working in different geographies all around Southeast Asia because Southeast Asia is a very fragmented market to start with.
Yes.
And we have regional teams, and then we have local teams, and so many teams going on. So in terms of collaboration, how would you talk about the differences between Southeast Asian startups and US startups?
In the US, at least when I was at Dropbox, we had a product team that was, sitting in the Bay Area. And we did have some kind of global offices around the world, like in Dublin in Europe, and also Tokyo in Japan. However, our product teams tended to really, think more from the US customer kind of perspective. And, they would not necessarily have to talk to all the different partners in all the different offices or all the different customers across all the different regions. Occasionally they would take trips to, go to those different regions and talk to their customers there. But what I observe in Southeast Asia is that, product teams need to talk to their local market partners and customers way more. And, instead of doing that, every couple months, it's you got to do that every day.
How do you deal with that? Do you have any tips of how you communicate with so many different stakeholders?
One of the things that's definitely helped me is to get really clear with organizing product feedback and being able to take in input from your customers in each of these markets and categorize them as such across each of these markets, and understanding where the problems apply for a particular local market versus apply across all your customers across all your markets. So really understanding what problem you're trying to solve at the beginning. Is it just for Indonesia? Is it just for Philippines? Or is it for all of your customers? That requires you to get really good at keeping track of your customer feedback. So that's the customer side. And then on the partner side, what has helped me is just setting up these cadences where I can touch base with the leads for different local market sales teams. So I can understand the challenges that they're facing. I can can then share, updates about how, the product teams are helping serve their customers. So then they can pass on that information to their customers. Having that type of cadence with the different local market teams has really increased the communication, the information flow, and also a lot of times these local market teams will pass on great feedback to the product teams.
So it's kind of like setting up a structure as well to get feedback in a more systematic way from your customers and from your partners.
That's right. That's right.
We talked about like communication, product maturity, collaboration, and I was really wondering, are there any kind of peculiarities, or is there like a unique brand of Southeast Asian like product management that you've seen so far?
I definitely think there's differences between product management in Southeast Asia and, the US. One of those differences that I'll just highlight is, in the US, the industry, the tech industry is just a lot more mature. So product management as a profession has just been around for a longer period of time and has gotten a lot more specialized. So, when I was working at Dropbox, for example, there were, growth product managers, there were core product managers, there were platform product managers. They all kind of worked across a bunch of different specialized skill sets. And that's what, I observed, it's kind of surprising actually coming to Southeast Asia. It's like a lot of those, specializations of product management don't exist yet. So a lot of product managers kind of need to do a little bit of everything. Right? They gotta, work on the core product. They gotta ship features for customers. They gotta, help scale it, as a platform, for other product teams. They need to grow it. What I learned is that the product managers in Southeast Asia actually have to be a lot broader in terms of their skill set and have to be a lot more versatile and be able to adapt to the different stages of the business and also different stages of each local market a lot more than what a PM might need to do in Silicon Valley. So I think that difference of, the specialization in the US, like where I was focused on growth product management, for example, at Dropbox, versus in Southeast Asia, there's a lot more opportunity to kind of work more broadly. Even at Xendit, I'm working on core products, growth products, platformizing products. And so that kind of broadness of the product discipline in Southeast Asia is quite unique.
How would you say the differences between Southeast Asian products and US products are? Because we know a lot of brands from the States and they are very global. They have global market share. However, for Southeast Asian products, it's still very much more like within Southeast Asia. So
right.
What do you think those like core differences are?
Silicon Valley is really, a land of immigrants. Founders of a lot of, the top Silicon Valley startups, actually were born overseas. I don't know if a lot of people know that. But what that means is that Silicon Valley just attracts a lot of great talent from everywhere. There's a lot of competition that's also generated by all the VC money. So Silicon Valley is kind of like a pressure cooker where you get a lot of these really, great product builders. Your VCs are really fueling their ambitions with VC dollars to build the best products, and then you end up getting amazing diamonds that come out of that pressure cooker. Other factor that I want to mention is also scale. So I think the products coming out of Silicon Valley, like your Facebook, Google, Pinterest, these are consumer, facing products that are designed for scale. So these are products that after, they achieved a certain amount of product fit and, traction, they can now scale to hundreds of millions and even billions of users. And they have the technology, the infrastructure, and the platforms to do so. I think that's quite unique to the kind of internet products, software products that are coming out of the Valley. In Southeast Asia, a lot more of the products are more specialized towards targeting, different markets in the region. And so they don't need to think as much about scaling to, hundreds of millions and billions of users most of the time. Who knows, that might change. And I would love to believe that it can also build these kind of products that eventually scale to global kind of audience.
Interesting. So Southeast Asian products are still very much more localized and solving very unique problems faced by Southeast Asians, whereas in the States, it's more of like solving a global problem.
Yeah, it's just been my observation so far that a lot of these consumer kind of tech companies are more common, at least in the US, instead of in Southeast Asia. And part of that might also be because there was just more infrastructure available for these companies to scale more easily in the US. So financial infrastructure, payments, logistics, all of these kind of pieces of infrastructure were laid out in the US in, the 2000s, 2010s, but a lot of those pieces of infrastructure are now getting built, for the first time in Southeast Asia. And I'm optimistic that once that infrastructure exists for, payments, logistics, online services, then, more consumer plays could actually be built on top of that.
What do you think Southeast Asian startups can learn from the startups in the States and vice versa?
One of the things that we just talked about was the specialization. There's been a lot more work done on growth product management, platform product management. I think these are interesting disciplines that could be practiced more in Southeast Asia. Like there could be different learnings that could apply here. And those kind of best practices, have been practiced by Dropbox and, Pinterest and other companies in Silicon Valley. That's one thing that the companies in the US would be a good example of. Vice versa, I think in Southeast Asia, startups are really good at being scrappy. I would say even more so than a lot of startups in the US. And I think it's very underrated, how scrappy founders can be in Southeast Asia. It's also very unique in that a lot of the markets are more regional. You start a company in Southeast Asia and you're building products for your country, you might need to expand to another country very quickly. So that's different from the US where there's already a very large population and large markets, and you might not need to think about non-US markets for a very long time. So I think one of the things that founders and also product builders do really well in Southeast Asia is really thinking about that regional expansion early. How do I get product market kind of validation really quickly, like through a more even scrappy kind of way? Maybe you don't need even a lot of technology, right, in order to validate your product ideas. I think in the US, because a lot of people come from the tech industry and they've worked at scale, they might be more likely to apply like some of the practices from like these big tech companies, but that might not actually be the right thing to apply in an early stage startup.
I also think that the fact that Southeast Asian startups are being scrappy is due to, like you mentioned about the limited infrastructure and then like the resources,
right, yeah, the resources
being more limited in that sense. But yeah, of course, like seeing it as an opportunity rather than a constraint would be like the best way to go.
That's right. At the same time, constraint also encourages creativity.
Dexter, thanks so much for sharing about your experience and your observations. I think a lot of our viewers out there also, some of them from Southeast Asia, some of them from the US, thinking about relocation. So from Southeast Asian PMs wanting to work in startups in Silicon Valley and Silicon Valley PMs wanting to then relocate to Southeast Asia. What's your advice for them?
Well, first of all, you should definitely try out, working in product culture and organization in another country. I think it's a really cool experience just for anyone in the product profession to try out. So first I'll start off with US-based product managers trying to transition into Southeast Asia. US kind of product organizations tend to be a lot more specialized in terms of their skill sets. So different PMs might be a growth PM, might be a core PM, platform PM, might be focusing on a particular domain. I would say if you're transitioning to Southeast Asia, try not to get too hung up on, these specializations. Instead, keep a more broad perspective about what your contributions could be, because the products that you're building in Southeast Asia will probably extend a lot more broadly than the products you're going to be building in a US-based tech company. Aside from that, I would also suggest, getting comfortable with WhatsApp, of course, adapting your communication style to kind of like more of the high context and indirect kind of communication style. Now, for PMs in Southeast Asia transitioning to the US, I would give similar but reverse set of tips. The communication style is definitely different in the US. I've talked to several folks who made that transition from Singapore and Indonesia to a US-based tech company, and they worry a little bit about, their accents, but I would say don't focus on the accents, focus on the content that you're actually delivering that's behind your accent. That'll come through. The other thing I would say is that when you're coming from a Southeast Asia market, you're coming to a product organization that might not have had any exposure to how customers might, interact with products in Southeast Asia. I think you actually bring a really unique perspective, to the product organizations. Like if you're working in a big global kind of tech company like a Facebook or like a Dropbox, chances are the PMs in that organization may not have even been to Singapore or Indonesia. They might not have an understanding of like how their products actually even work in those local markets and how users, customers might be confused or might not understand how to use particular aspects of the products. I think that's a great set of perspective that you can bring to the table that will be very unique and would be beneficial even for the product development efforts. So definitely don't underestimate kind of like what kind of contributions you can make based on your market knowledge and expertise. That can probably help add a lot to the diversity of discussion.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times we focus a lot about the style, but then at the end of the day, it's really about the substance that you deliver, and also be confident in your own unique strengths. So thanks so much, Dexter, for your super valuable insights. I think a lot of us will walk away feeling very inspired and gaining a deeper knowledge about the difference between Southeast Asian startups and startups in the Valley. Everyone, if you found this video useful, please remember to like, subscribe, and comment down below on any thoughts that you have about the differences between Southeast Asian startups and US startups. Thank you, everyone. See you next week.
Bye-bye. See you later.